pressing heavily on him. He could not shake the feeling that this mission would change everything. The galaxy was on the verge of a new era, one where loyalty was not won through fear or strength, but through the manipulation of the mind itself. The Venator continued its silent march through the stars, its course set for the heart of the rebellion. As the ship cruised onward, Andros found himself contemplating the future. A future where nothing was certain, where the line between friend and foe could be blurred in an instant, and where the power of the mind would reign supreme. He knew this mission was his chance to cement his place in history, but he also wondered, what kind of man would he become once the weapon was in his hands? Would he still be the loyal soldier of the Empire, or would the power of the device corrupt him, just as it had with so many others before? The answers lay ahead, hidden in the shadows of the rebellion's stronghold, where the fate of the galaxy would be decided in the silence of the mind. Chapter 2: The Heart of the Rebellion. The stars outside the Venator's viewport twinkled like diamonds in the cold expanse of space. But Admiral Andros couldn't focus on their beauty. His mind raced with thoughts of the mission ahead, the weapon, the rebellion, and his role in what was to come. The grand corridors of the Imperial ship felt oppressive, each step echoing in the vast emptiness, mirroring the isolation that he felt inside. The rebellion had always seemed like an enemy to defeat, an idea to stamp out. But now, with Varin's promise of a new weapon that could alter the course of history, Andros began to wonder if he was stepping into a conflict much greater than he could have ever imagined. "Admiral," a voice broke through his reverie. It was Commander Celine, his trusted second-in-command. She was a seasoned officer, known for her sharp mind and unwavering loyalty to the Empire. Her tall, athletic frame stood at attention as she approached him. Andros turned to face her, trying to push the thoughts swirling in his head into the background. "Yes, Commander?" Celine's brow furrowed as she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "I've been reviewing the mission logs, and I must ask, do we have enough intel on the rebellion's stronghold? We know their movements are unpredictable. If we are to strike at the heart of their resistance, we need to understand their defenses better." Andros nodded, appreciating her diligence. "We have the basic layout of their operations, but it is not enough. We will have to rely on covert intelligence once we are closer to the target. We must remain flexible and adaptable. If the rebellion is as organized as reports suggest, we will have little time to plan once we're inside." Celine hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing her words. "And if we fail, Admiral? If they activate this weapon against us?" Andros's eyes darkened. "Then we fight back. The Empire will never fall to the likes of the rebellion. Not while I am in command." "Understood," she replied, though her voice carried a trace of doubt. "What's our next move?" "We make for the rebel stronghold," Andros said, his voice firm. "Prepare the fleet. We leave within the hour." The warship hummed to life as Celine moved off to relay the orders. Andros stood still for a moment, looking out the viewport, his thoughts racing. The rebellion had always been a thorn in the side of the Empire, but now, with the power to manipulate the minds of others at their fingertips, the rebellion was no longer just an obstacle, it was an existential threat. Hours later, the Venator emerged from the outer rim of the star system, entering a nebula cloud that concealed the location of the rebel base. It was a desolate and hostile environment, filled with twisting gas clouds and asteroid fields. The perfect place to hide. Andros sat in the command chair of the war room, his fingers dancing over the holographic controls, tracking the fleet's progress toward the heart of the enemy's domain. The silence of space hung heavy in the air, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the occasional flicker of the control panels. "Admiral, we've reached the edge of the nebula," Celine's voice came through the comms, breaking his concentration. "Our sensors are barely functional in this cloud. We'll need to proceed on visual." Andros gave a brief nod. "Very well. Prepare the strike team. We'll need to be on the ground within the hour." The fleet began its descent into the nebula, its massive presence barely visible amidst the swirling gas and debris. Andros had once admired the Empire's ability to exert its dominance across the stars, but today, he felt the weight of his orders more than ever before. There would be no turning back once they reached the rebel stronghold. As the Venator descended into the nebula, the stars seemed to fade, the ship's systems struggling to maintain their connection to the outside. Chapter 1: Shadows of the Empire. The galaxy was not at peace. The once glorious Empire, though still mighty, now teetered on the edge of ruin. For years, the rebellion had fought a tireless war against the Empire's iron fist, and now, deep in the heart of a distant star system, a new threat was rising. The cold, metallic expanse of the Imperial Star Destroyer Venator cut through the black void, its immense hull reflecting the distant stars like a jagged shard of obsidian. Inside, the hum of machinery and the echo of footsteps reverberated through the sterile corridors. This was no ordinary warship, its purpose was far greater. At the helm stood Admiral Andros, a figure known throughout the Empire for his unmatched tactical brilliance and ruthless ambition. He gazed out the viewport, watching as the galaxy unfolded before him, a canvas of chaos and opportunity. "Admiral," a voice broke through his thoughts, drawing his attention to the man standing before him, a young officer, fresh from the academy. He saluted sharply. "Message from Lord Varin. He requests your presence in the war room, immediately." Andros turned slowly, his dark eyes narrowing as he studied the officer. "Lord Varin," he muttered. "Of course. Lead the way." The war room was a chamber of stone and steel, a place where decisions that would shape the fate of entire star systems were made. At the center, a massive holomap flickered, displaying the positions of rebel forces and Imperial strongholds. The light from the hologram cast eerie shadows across the faces of the men gathered around it. Lord Varin stood at the map, his imposing figure framed by the glowing projections. He was a figure cloaked in mystery, a man whose loyalty to the Emperor was unquestioned, yet whose ambitions stretched far beyond the simple task of conquest. His pale, almost translucent skin gave him an ethereal quality, and his piercing eyes seemed to see beyond the physical realm. "Admiral," Varin's voice was soft, yet carried a weight that demanded attention. "I trust you've been keeping up with the latest developments." Andros approached, his boots echoing on the cold metal floor. "The rebellion continues to spread, my lord. Their resources are limited, but their numbers are growing. We've managed to keep them at bay for now." Varin's lips curled into a faint smile, though his expression remained cold and unreadable. "Your efforts have been commendable, Admiral. But this war is no longer about simply quelling the rebellion. The time has come to take the fight to them, to crush their resistance once and for all." Andros raised an eyebrow. "How do you propose we do that, my lord? The rebellion is scattered across the galaxy. They have no centralized command. It would be impossible to wipe them out in one strike." Varin turned to face him, his expression darkening. "There is a new weapon, Admiral. One far more powerful than anything the rebellion has ever seen. It is not a weapon of destruction, but of control. With it, we can bring the galaxy to its knees." Andros' curiosity piqued, he stepped closer to the map, his eyes scanning the swirling holograms. "What kind of weapon?" Lord Varin's smile deepened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A weapon that can manipulate the minds of others. A device that can control entire fleets, turn enemies into allies, and force worlds to submit to our will without firing a single shot." For a long moment, the room was silent. The weight of Varin's words hung heavy in the air, filling the space with a palpable tension. Andros stared at him, trying to comprehend the magnitude of such a power. "A mind control device?" he asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "That sounds impossible." "It is not impossible," Varin replied coolly. "It is the culmination of years of research, and it exists in the deepest, most secure section of the Imperial fleet. We have already begun the process of weaponizing it. Soon, we will have the ability to command every living being in the galaxy. Andros felt a shiver run down his spine, though he tried to conceal it. The idea of such a weapon was terrifying, but the potential for control was undeniable. And how do we obtain this weapon, my lord? Varin's smile returned, this time tinged with something darker. You, Admiral, will lead the mission. You will travel to the heart of the rebellion's stronghold. There, hidden within their most guarded facility, lies the device. Retrieve it, and the galaxy will be ours. Andros met Varin's gaze, the weight of the task settling on his shoulders. He had always been a loyal servant of the Empire, but this mission, this was different. This was not just a battle for power, it was a chance to control the very will of the galaxy. I understand, Andros said, his voice low. I will not fail you. Varin nodded once, his gaze unwavering. I know you won't, Admiral. The Empire's future depends on you. As Andros left the war room, the weight of his orders. Universe. But Andros knew that the Venator was just one part of the Empire's vast military machine. The true weapon of war was the man at its helm. After hours of tense travel, the fleet finally emerged from the nebulous depths. Before them lay a massive, heavily fortified asteroid base, the heart of the rebellion. It was a fortress of metal and stone, surrounded by a dense network of defensive ships and automated weapons platforms. Admiral, we're within range of the target, Celine's voice crackled through the comms. The rebellion's defenses are formidable. We'll need to strike fast and hard. Prepare the troops, Andros commanded, his voice colder than ever. We will infiltrate the base and secure the weapon. This ends today. The ground assault team, consisting of the Empire's elite soldiers, geared up for their mission. They were the best of the best, trained in combat, stealth, and survival. They would infiltrate the heart of the rebellion, find the weapon, and return victorious. But as Andros watched the preparations unfold, a strange feeling settled in his chest. The weight of the mission was not lost on him, nor was the significance of what they were about to do. He wasn't just fighting for the Empire anymore. He was fighting for something much larger, control. And once the weapon was in his hands, he knew there would be no limits to what he could achieve. The ship's airlock hissed open, and the strike team disembarked into the cold, silent void of space, their boots touching the surface of the asteroid base. The atmosphere was tense, every breath heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. We move on my command, Andros barked, his voice steady and commanding. Our mission is simple, get the device and leave. No mistakes. The soldiers nodded in unison, moving like shadows across the bleak landscape of the asteroid base, their movements calculated, precise. Every corner, every shadow, could hide a threat. As the team advanced deeper into the heart of the base, Andros felt the weight of his responsibility. The rebellion's fight for freedom had always seemed futile, yet there was something to be said about the passion behind their cause. In the end, he knew the decision was already made, the weapon had to be secured. No matter the cost. The deep hum of machinery echoed through the darkened hallways of the base. The soldiers moved swiftly, their movements synchronized like a deadly dance. The silence was unsettling, the only sounds being the clanking of boots against metal floors and the quiet whir of the base's systems. Suddenly, a low alarm blared, shattering the quiet. Red lights flashed across the corridor, and Andros's heart raced as his soldiers snapped to attention. It's a trap, he muttered under his breath. The rebel forces had been expecting them. Chapter 3, Into the Trap. The blaring alarm reverberated through the dark corridors of the asteroid base, echoing off the cold metal walls. Andros's pulse quickened. He knew they had been discovered, but he hadn't anticipated it would happen so soon. The rebels were not fools, they had expected the Empire to strike. It was now a race against time to secure the weapon. Move, move, move. Andros barked, his voice cutting through the rising tension. His soldiers surged forward, their weapons raised and ready. The sound of boots pounding against the metallic floors filled the hallway, a chorus of urgency that only intensified the situation. Celine was at his side, her blaster rifle held steady as she scanned the surroundings. "We need to reach the central control room," she said, her eyes flicking to the holomap displayed on her wrist. "That's where the weapon is being kept. It's heavily guarded, but we can still make it if we move quickly." Andros nodded, his mind already working through the options. He had anticipated resistance, but the scale of it, so sudden, so fierce, was a different matter entirely. They would have to fight their way through, and fast. A loud crash echoed from the end of the corridor, followed by the unmistakable hum of blaster fire. The rebels were already engaging. Andros didn't hesitate. "Take cover," he ordered, diving behind a set of crates that lined the wall. His soldiers followed suit, crouching low and peering out from their positions. The sharp crack of blaster fire reverberated around them, followed by the screams of soldiers and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. "Rebel forces ahead," shouted one of Andros's officers, crouched behind a metal pillar. "They're entrenched." Andros's mind raced. He needed to push forward, but they couldn't afford to get bogged down in a firefight. If they lost any more time, the weapon could be destroyed or, worse, fall into the wrong hands. "Celine," Andros said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We need a diversion. Get the squad to flank them from the side. I'll lead a direct assault." Celine gave him a sharp look, clearly questioning the wisdom of such a risky move. But she didn't argue. "Understood, Admiral." With a quick motion, she gestured to the soldiers around her. They moved with military precision, splitting off into groups as Andros led the charge. The soldiers fired their blasters, providing cover fire, while Andros sprinted forward, his eyes locked on the enemy's position. Blaster shots whizzed past him, some too close for comfort. Andros felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration that he had long since learned to control. The Empire was built on decisive action, and there was no time for hesitation now. As Andros neared the rebel line, he could see them, familiar faces from his intelligence reports. They were not the faceless soldiers he had encountered on countless other battlefields. These were men and women who had once been citizens, now turned to revolutionaries. And as much as he hated to admit it, there was a certain respect for their resolve. They fought for something they believed in, just as he did for the Empire. But there would be no room for such sentiments here. Not today. With a cry, Andros leapt over the barricade, his blaster raised. The first rebel soldier was taken by surprise, the shot echoing in the narrow corridor as the rebel crumpled to the ground. Andros moved like a predator, his soldiers following him as they cleared the way, one room at a time. "Push forward!" Andros shouted, his voice now a roar over the sounds of combat. "We have no time to waste." The strike team advanced steadily, cutting down rebels left and right, but the deeper they moved into the base, the more intense the resistance became. Rebel soldiers seemed to materialize from every corner, their fire relentless, their tactics sophisticated. Andros could feel the strain beginning to show. They were taking losses, soldiers who had been with him since the beginning, each one a valuable asset to the mission. He pushed the thought away. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. They had a goal, and they had to achieve it at all costs. After what felt like an eternity, Andros and his team finally reached the central control room. The large blast doors stood in their way, locked and reinforced, but not for long. Andros's engineering team had already begun the procedure to breach the door, their tools cutting through the thick metal with practiced efficiency. "We're almost there," one of the engineers called out. "Another few seconds, Admiral." Good, Andros replied, his voice steady. Then we'll make it count. The doors finally groaned and shuddered before sliding open, revealing the heart of the base. Inside, the central control room was a large, dimly lit chamber filled with banks of computers and consoles. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood the device. Andros's heart skipped a beat as his eyes fell on it, an object of immense power, humming faintly with an energy that seemed almost alive. But there was no time to admire the weapon. Rebel soldiers swarmed into the room from every exit, weapons drawn, their faces determined. They knew this was the final stand. Andros raised his blaster, taking aim at the first group of rebels that rushed in. The air was thick with the crackling sound of blasters as soldiers on both sides engaged in a deadly dance. Andros could feel the heat of the battle intensify as the seconds ticked by. "Protect the device!" Andros shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to secure it." Celine, already a step ahead, moved toward the platform, her rifle aimed at the remaining rebels. "Admiral, the device is secure," she called out. "We've got it." But Andros was already moving toward the heart of the room, his mind focused solely on the weapon. His hand hovered over the device, the power it held radiating from its core. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The battle around him, the rebels who fell, the soldiers who fought, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the weapon. Andros knew that once the weapon was in his grasp, everything would change. This was the turning point. The moment when the Empire would no longer be forced to fight, because it would control the very minds of its enemies. The last of the rebels fell, and silence filled the control room. Andros stood before the device, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he reached out and touched it. "Admiral," Celine said quietly, approaching from behind. "We have it." Andros glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the weapon, as if lost in its power. "Let's get out of here," Andros finally said, his voice low, but filled with an unshakable resolve. "The Empire will rise again." The soldiers began to move out, carrying the weapon with them. But for Andros, the galaxy had already changed. The power to control the will of others was now in his hands, and with it, he would remake the Empire in his image. The war was over, at least for the Empire. And it would begin again for the rebellion. Chapter 4: The Price of Power. The Venator sat in the vast emptiness of space, its dark silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. The battle for the device had been won, but the war was far from over. As the ship made its way back to the heart of the Empire, Admiral Andros couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was on the cusp of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The device, now safely stored in the war room, hummed with an eerie energy. Andros stood before it, his fingers lightly tracing the surface. The thing was a masterpiece of science, an object of immense power, capable of bending the will of anyone it touched. He could feel its pull, the silent temptation calling out to him. "You've done it, Admiral," came Celine's voice from behind him. She stepped into the war room, her face serious, her tone tinged with something else, unease. "The Empire's future is now in your hands." Andros didn't turn to face her. Instead, he continued to study the device. "Yes, it is," he replied quietly. "The galaxy will kneel before us. The rebellion, the factions, even the Emperor himself. No one will be able to challenge us once this power is fully realized." Celine stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the metal floor. "But what happens after that, Admiral? Once we have control over everyone's mind, who will be left to fight for the Empire? Will it still be the same Empire?" Andros glanced at her over his shoulder, his face hardening. "The Empire will be stronger than ever before. A unified galaxy, brought together under one will, my will." Celine's gaze softened for a brief moment, but she did not speak further. The power of the device had a way of changing everything. She knew as well as he did that once it was in the hands of the Empire, it would be too late to turn back. The days following their victory on the rebel base were a blur. Andros worked tirelessly to study the device, testing its limits, its capabilities. The more he learned, the more he realized just how dangerous it truly was. It was not simply a weapon, it was a force, a tool of domination that could change the course of history. And as he stood before it, he began to feel a deep unease creeping up from within. The power it offered was intoxicating. In the darkened chambers of the war room, Andros stood alone, his hands resting lightly on the controls of the device. The room hummed with the energy it emanated, and he could feel the pull, like a whisper in his mind. His gaze was fixed on the holographic display in front of him, showing a list of key Imperial figures, officers, governors, admirals, all waiting for his command. "All it takes is a simple push," Andros whispered to himself, his voice cold and distant. "One word, and they will bend to my will." He reached out to activate the device, his fingers trembling slightly. He had to resist. He had to remember why he had fought so hard to secure this power. Just then, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Admiral, we've received a communication from Lord Varin. He requests an immediate meeting." Andros turned to see Celine standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. He nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Very well," he said, his voice firm, though there was a trace of hesitation. "Prepare the war room. I'll meet him there." The meeting with Lord Varin was held in the grandest chamber of the ship, a place fit for the high-ranking officials of the Empire. The air was thick with tension as Andros stepped into the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Varin was already waiting, his back to him as he studied the star map projected in front of him. The pale figure turned slowly as Andros approached, his face unreadable, his eyes as piercing as ever. "Admiral," Varin greeted him softly. "It is good to see you again. I trust your mission was a success." Andros bowed slightly, though there was no warmth in the gesture. "The device is in our hands, my lord. The rebellion has been crushed." Varin's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth there either. "Good. The galaxy will soon be under our control." "But I sense something else in your voice, Admiral. There is doubt in your heart." Andros felt a cold chill run down his spine, though he did not show it. Varin was always perceptive, always able to sense the true feelings of those around him. Andros had never been one to show weakness, but in this moment, he found himself struggling to hold on to his resolve. "The device," Andros began slowly, "it's more powerful than we ever imagined. I can feel its influence. The temptation to use it is overwhelming." Varin's smile widened, and he took a step closer to Andros. "It is meant to be that way, Admiral. Power does not come without a price. But the Empire has always known sacrifice. With the device, we will bend the will of the galaxy to our own desires. No one will stand against us. Not the rebels, not the Senate, not even the Emperor himself." Andros's gaze flickered to the device, still sitting on the table in the center of the room. He could almost hear it calling to him, a siren song that promised ultimate control. "But at what cost?" Andros whispered. Varin's expression darkened. "Do not let doubt cloud your judgment, Admiral. This is the path we have chosen. The Empire will rise, and you will lead it to its rightful place." Andros remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the device. He knew Varin was right. There was no turning back now. The galaxy would be his to command, the rebellion nothing more than a memory. The cost was irrelevant. The power was everything. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. Andros began to deploy the device's influence over key members of the Empire. Governors and military leaders fell in line, their minds now under his control. Each success only fueled his confidence, each step further cementing his grip on the galaxy. But as the weeks passed, Andros could not shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He had succeeded in uniting the Empire, but at what cost? The rebels had been defeated, but their ideals lived on in the hearts of the people. The Empire was no longer simply a government, it was a living, breathing entity that thrived on fear and control. Andros had achieved his goal, but now, the real question lingered: was it worth the price? The galaxy had changed. And Andros had become the very thing he had once sworn to destroy. Chapter 5: The Fall of the Empire. The Empire, once a symbol of order and strength, now stood under the dark shadow of its own creation. The device had given Andros everything he had ever dreamed of: power, control, dominion over the galaxy. But as his influence spread, so did the cracks in his resolve. The temptation of the device, the absolute control it granted, was a drug he could not shake. The more he used it, the more he saw the faces of his people change, his commanders, his officers, even the common citizens, all of them now puppets of his will. And yet, something gnawed at him. The hollow feeling inside him, the emptiness that grew with each passing day, told him that something vital had been lost in his conquest. The rebellion had been crushed, but so had the heart of the Empire. He stood at the balcony of the Venator, gazing out at the endless stars, the vastness of space stretching before him. His thoughts were interrupted by Selene, who had entered silently behind him. "Admiral," she said softly, stepping up beside him. "The final push is underway. The remaining rebel pockets are being wiped out. The galaxy is nearly ours." Andros nodded, though his heart felt heavy. "And what of the people? The ones who still resist? The ones who haven't yet felt the full weight of our control?" Selene's eyes flickered with hesitation. "They will submit. They have no choice." "Is that what we've become?" Andros asked quietly. "An empire built on submission, rather than loyalty." Selene didn't respond immediately, and in the silence, the truth of Andros's words began to settle between them. The Empire was no longer a symbol of strength. It had become a machine of control, its soul consumed by the very weapon that had brought them victory. "It was for the greater good," Selene finally said, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "We did what needed to be done." Andros turned to face her, his eyes searching hers for the conviction that had once been there. "But did we?" he asked. "Did we truly do what was best for the galaxy? Or did we simply give in to the temptation of power?" There was a long pause before Selene spoke again, her voice softer than ever. "Power is the only thing that keeps the galaxy in order, Admiral. Without it, there would be chaos, rebellion, anarchy. This is the only way to bring stability." Andros's gaze hardened. "Stability at the cost of freedom," he said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "We've become the very thing we once fought against." Selene didn't reply. She didn't need to. The truth was there, hanging between them. Andros took a deep breath and turned back to the stars. He had spent his life climbing the ranks of the Empire, seeking order, control, a galaxy unified under the banner of the Emperor. But now, as he stood on the precipice of his ultimate victory, he realized that the cost of that victory was far greater than he had ever anticipated. The final days of the rebellion were swift and brutal. The remnants of the resistance were crushed one by one, their leaders either falling in battle or bowing to Andros's will. The galaxy, once fractured by war, was now under his control, its fate sealed by his hand. But the victory felt hollow. Andros stood in the throne room of the Imperial palace, his mind racing. He had done it. The galaxy was his. The rebels were defeated. The device had given him the power to control not just armies, but entire worlds. Yet, as he gazed upon the empty seats of the Imperial court, he felt no satisfaction. Celine entered the room, her steps echoing in the silence. She stood at attention, her face unreadable. "The last rebel stronghold has fallen," she reported. "The galaxy is ours." Andros's eyes remained fixed on the empty chairs. The seats of power that once held the greatest minds of the Empire, now all gone. "And what now?" he asked quietly. "What happens when there's no one left to challenge us? What happens when there's no one left to rule but ourselves?" Celine stepped forward, her voice firm. "We rebuild. We reshape the galaxy into what it should have always been. An empire that rules with absolute control. No more chaos. No more rebellion. Only order." Andros turned to face her, his eyes cold. "Order," he repeated. "Is that what we've become? A galaxy of slaves to our will?" Celine met his gaze without flinching. "Order is all that matters now." A long silence followed, thick with the weight of Andros's thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "And what of the people? What of the countless lives we've controlled, the freedom we've stolen?" "All of that is irrelevant now," Celine replied, her voice almost mechanical. "The galaxy is safe. That's all that matters." Andros's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. He had come so far, but the more he thought about the device, the more he realized its true cost. The Empire may have been secured, but at the price of the very ideals it was meant to uphold. Power had become the Empire's only goal, and the people, their voices, their freedoms, had been silenced in the name of control. The device, the power it offered, was too much. It had changed him. It had changed everything. In the end, Andros made a decision, a choice that would forever alter the course of history. He destroyed the device. The power that had promised to control the galaxy was wiped from existence, reduced to nothing more than shattered fragments. The device's influence was gone, and with it, the hold Andros had over the galaxy's mind. Andros stood alone in the ruins of the device, the weight of his decision settling upon him. For the first time in years, he felt something other than power. He felt free. But it was a freedom tinged with regret. The Empire would survive. But it would no longer be ruled by a single mind. It would rebuild, slowly, painfully. And maybe, just maybe, the people would find a way to reclaim what had been lost. But that, Andros realized, was no longer his fight to win. The galaxy, once ruled by a single man's ambition, was now left to determine its own future. The Empire, broken and scarred, would rebuild, and the rebellion's ideals would live on in the hearts of those who had never given up on freedom. And as for Andros, he had lost everything, his power, his control, and his place in history. But in the silence that followed, he realized that maybe, just maybe, it was the first step towards something better. The end of the Empire was the beginning of something else. And that was a future Andros could no longer shape. The end.